we're going to learn today is a little bit about the Constitution, which is the governing document of the United States. What you really need to know is that the Constitution with the capital C, the big C, is not the first Constitution, and I'm using the word Constitution with a little c, as a social agreement. The little c, the word Constitution with a little c means an agreement between a people and a government in order for the government to govern the people. That is a constitution with a lowercase. Our Constitution is also called the Constitution, and that's why we capitalize Constitution. But it's not our first one. Our first one was actually called the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was the governing document that existed right after the Revolutionary War. It served us well, and it kind of kept us together as one nation. But immediately after the Revolutionary War and in the years immediately following the creation of the Articles of Confederation, a lot of issues began to come up. But let's step back a little bit. Did you know that George Washington, considered the father of our nation, was not our first president? No, indeed. He was actually our first president under the Constitution with the capital C. Our first president was actually John Hanson. John Hanson was an individual that had been elected to Congress, and at the time of the Articles of Confederation, there was only one branch of government. That branch of government was Congress, a legislative body. The function was to pass laws. Now, within this legislative body that was selected or elected by the different states, when they convened, they selected one member of them who would be the president and would preside over the Congress. And this was John Hanson. What is very interesting about Mr. Hanson, and one of the things that we still remember today, is that he receives a letter of congratulations. And when he opened it, who is the signature of this letter? Who sent him the letter? None other than George Washington, congratulating him for his new post as President of the United States. But that's a little bit of the prehistory. I would call that the before the real United States. As you know, the United States entered into a period where there was a lot of difficulties under the Articles. So much so that some of the colonists used the same arguments that they used against England to try to revolt against the newly found government. Things like taxation without representation. As a matter of fact, there was a famous rebellion called the Shays Rebellion that George Washington, after he had been the great general in the Revolutionary War, had to put down. Well, I think the Shays Rebellion, among other things, led the colonists to realize, or the new nation to realize, that it wasn't working out. So they sent a group of men to Philadelphia for the purpose of trying to fix this document, this ruling document, over them. And when they arrived in Philadelphia, they immediately realized that it was broken beyond repair. And they agreed to try to create something new and something better. Born out of that resolve, or that decision by these group of men, was the Constitution of the United States. Now, a couple of basic facts about the Constitution. Number one, it is a very short document. As a matter of fact, as you will see in the classroom, the picture that you are being shown is the entire Constitution. That is it. I know that it is reduced, and the actual document is a little bit bigger. But imagine that in that document you find the entire Constitution as it existed when it was passed. That is it. So let's look at the Constitution and talk about a couple of things. Number one, the Constitution is divided, just like any other document or book. So let's play a little game. Do you know what a chapter to a book is with the Constitution? A chapter is to a book as an article is to the Constitution. So an article and a chapter are kind of the same thing. They play the same function. There are a divisible chunk of information. And the Constitution has several articles. we're going to talk in this small time about the first three articles. Now, the articles basically break down how the government is going to be run, how we are going to do things. The first three articles, in essence, creates the government that we know today. Article 1, as you can see from what you're being shown, is the longest of the. It encompasses that entire first column. Article 1 is about Congress. You're probably thinking, why is Article 1 so big? Well, number one is because the colonists, what they knew was a legislative branch, all the way from the House of Burgesses to Parliament in England. The colonists understood what was a group of people whose function was to create laws. And as they wrote it down, they had a lot to say. In Article 1, you're going to find things such as who can be a representative and who can be a senator. It outlines the age requirements, the national origin requirement, or the birth, place of birth, citizenship, the length of stay within the United States of these individuals. Interestingly enough, in order to either be a representative or a senator, one does not have to be a natural-born citizen. As you may know, a natural-born citizen is a citizen who is born in the United States. There are two types of citizens, natural-born and naturalized. So in order to be a congressperson, you don't have to be natural-born, you could be naturalized. Now let's turn to Article 2. Article 2, as you can tell, is half as big as Article 1. It's not as big and it doesn't take as much space. Article 2 is about the executive branch. I think that in Article 2, the founders of the Constitution had an understanding of what they wanted. And as a matter of fact, I think that in their mind, they probably tailored Article 2 to a particular individual. And the particular individual would have been George Washington. Now, Article 2 tells you that the President of the United States actually has to be a natural-born citizen of the United States, different from Congress. And Article 2 outlines the presidency, the vice presidency, and the executive branch. Now, I want you to look at Article 3 of the Constitution. In comparison to 1 and 2, it is minute. Article 3 establishes the judicial branch. As a matter of fact, in Article 3, only one court is created, the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, the Supreme Court of the United States, in essence, is the court that decides whether something is constitutional or not constitutional. But guess what? That function, or any other function of the Supreme Court, really is not very well outlined in that very small paragraph. Now, what do we know from these three paragraphs? We know what the power of the United States government is. Now, how do I know that? Well, the power of the United States government is found in Article 1. Interestingly enough, the one that creates Congress. In Article 1, Section 8, the power of the United States, it's outlined. And there's only 18 things. 18, that is it. No more. 18 things that the United States government can do. And beyond those 18 things, what about the rest of the things? What about the rest of the areas of the law? Where do they come from? Well, in order to understand that, you have to fast forward to a portion behind the actual Constitution, which are called the amendments. These are changes to the Constitution. Not in 1, not in 2, not in 5, not in 8. You're going to find the rest of the powers lie in the states and in the people, but you're going to find that in the 10th Amendment of the United States. Now, the 10th Amendment is called the Reserved Powers. Reserved by whom? Reserved by the states and the people. So, imagine this as a cookie. All of the powers that government can have is the entire cookie. The federal government is the one bite that you offer your friend to have. Everything else is the states. So, of these two governments, which is the most powerful? Well, pursuant to our system of government, state governments are technically more powerful than the federal government. Now, the federal government can do these 18 things. And the 18 things sound like normal things that you would expect, like the federal government can tax. They can collect taxes, which makes sense. What else can the federal government do? Well, it could create an army and a navy. And that also makes sense because that's what countries tend to do. So these first 17 things sound like that, regulating commerce and so on. 18, power number 18 is a little bit unusual. And that's why I want to talk to you a little bit more about it. Power number 18 is called the elastic clause. The elastic clause is called that because it tends to expand the first 17. Some people actually call it the necessary and proper clause. Why necessary and proper? Because that is actually language from clause number 18. The federal government has all of these 17 powers, and 18 says, and any other that may be necessary and proper at the time to carry out 1 through 17. Which means that if the federal government needs to do something that isn't named in 1 through 17, but that's necessary and proper to carry out 1 through 17, it can do that. So as you can tell, it expands greatly the powers of the federal government. What I would like for you to do is take a brief little quiz on what I have just talked to you about. And let's see how well you learned today.